Bruce McDonald is an award-winning Canadian filmmaker and director based in Toronto, and Nick Craine is an acclaimed graphic artist who calls Guelph, Ontario, home. McDonald's fifth film was an adaptation of Michael Turner's novel Hardcore Logo and chronicled a first-wave punk rock band's disastrous reunion tour across Canada. The influential 1996 film was an underground hit. Even Quentin Tarantino became smitten with it, securing its U.S. distribution rights. The next year, Craine's graphic novel adaptation of McDonald's film was published, and to commemorate its 20th anniversary, House of Anansi has issued an expanded edition of Craine's book, and the occasion is being marked with launch events and screenings of the film. I met with Bruce and Nick at Bruce's Toronto office recently, and we discussed how they first met some 25 years ago, the work of artist Chester Brown and other underground comic artists, making road movies and graphic novels, Canadian content and hockey, the weird but cool resonance of Hardcore Logo 20 years later, the rise of mockumentaries in a world obsessed with fake news, the Bucky Hates song Never Done, and much, much more. Sponsored by Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee, this is Bruce McDonald and Nick Craine on the 319th episode of Creative Control with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for being on this show. Who are you?
My name is Nick Craine. I'm a graphic novelist artist from Guelph, Ontario.
Nick, it's nice to have you on the show finally.
Thank you so much.
And you, sir?
My name's Bruce McDonald. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm happy to be here.
It's nice to have you on the show, Bruce.
Yeah.
I'm, I don't want to gush per se, but I mean, I've been watching your films for since I was a little kid.
Well,
Feels
that's
like
awesome. Yeah.
20 years ago, I used to watch them. I used to have the Cambridge Public Library used to have all your films on tape, and I would take them out and I'd bring them home, and I think we did some school projects on them in high school and university as well. I don't mean it. You must get this all the time, right?
No, not all the time. Just keep saying it. It's good. I like it.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable, and this project that we're going to talk about today made an impression on me as well. So, I guess to begin, where are we? What is this space? Where are we, Bruce? Can you talk about that?
We are in an office on Queen Street West in Toronto, and it's the headquarters of the Visual Mechanics Union, Local 999.
Oh, okay.
And upstairs is a company called Revolver, and they make rock videos and commercials. And downstairs is a place called the Velvet Underground, which is a club for bands. And this is my headquarters. This is where we hatch up new projects, and I work with a fellow who will be along shortly, Patrick Whistler. He's a very talented screenwriter and a partner in crime. And from this little humble abode, we plan world domination.
That's great. That's amazing. And Nick, you live in Guelph. Do you work primarily at your home?
I work, I've got an office in my house and share a wall with my son's bedroom next door, and so I can work under any conditions, in other words. Yeah.
And is that okay? Do you like working from home? You're an independent guy?
I completely love it. Yeah, there's no commute. Often the family will go to bed and I will go back to work, and it'll be 2 a.m. and there's no to and fro. You can work anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, do you consider yourself an independent freelance worker as a film director? How does that work? Do you work for a company?
No, I have a company of, and then I whore myself out on occasion as a director for hire, gun for hire.
Right.
But just generally I've always been an independent sort of. It's how we came up with a little gang of other filmmakers and like-minded people in the city. And you're independent, but the community is essential to being independent.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have two guys here with an independent spirit. Sometimes that can be great. Sometimes that can lead to, tension because they both think they know what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
How do you two get along in terms of collaboration? Because you've done, how many projects have you actually worked on together?
Well, I've adapted two of Bruce's films into graphic novels.
I'm trying to convince him to do more, but he's so busy now. He's
yeah. Well, I mean, I to address what you're saying, we used to get together a bunch of illustrators would get together for a drink and draw at a pub. And sometimes it was great, and sometimes it was really weird because you got a lot of guys who really don't leave the closet. They just sort of work by themselves quietly, and then getting them together to socialize, your social skills are kind of subpar, right?
It's good for them, though.
It is very good for them.
It's good to get out
You gotta
now and again.
get the zoo animals out.
Yeah.
But Bruce, on the other hand, is very, very free and very loose, and I'm gonna speak. Maybe I'm not correct, but you kind of just throw stimulation out there and see what comes back. You're not someone who's like, okay, this is my vision. I want it to be like this, and no, I'm gonna cut this, and it's a very free thing.
Yeah.
That it's not improvised necessarily, but you let people create.
It's all improvised.
Is it really?
It's all one freestyle jazz odyssey. No, I mean, back to the sort of Nick and I collaborating. I mean, the fact that we both work in different mediums is very complementary as opposed to competitive. It's not like we're both trying to direct the same shot in a movie, or I'm trying to get him to draw things in a certain way or tell a story in a certain way. So it's really enjoyable in that way because we're both making movies in different ways, or we're telling stories in different ways by using some different tools.
Right.
But they both are very complementary. So it's fun for me. I think it's on both sides. You kind of see, oh, that's how they do it in that medium, and so that's super fun when those mediums actually can collide and shimmer off each other. And then, and then I just lost the thread.
When you were working on Tracy Fragments, that felt to me as though you're kind of experimenting with comics.
Oh yeah, I mean, comics were a huge influence on that movie.
You've got it's a time-based medium, but you've got moments on a plane that you're experiencing simultaneously.
Yeah. Like
one
a page.
moment affects the other.
Yeah.
The moment it's introduced, it changes the content of the first image, etc. And I looked at that and went, whoa, this is different. That felt kind of like it was, because comics is like paper cinema, but that was like cinema comics. I don't know.
Yeah, we were trying to get back to graphic novels and comics because often we'd be finding ourselves walking back to the Beguiling or one of the stores around town just to kind of look at page layouts, look at framing, look at sequences and how they were executed through time. So it was very inspiring. And you can't quite match what graphic novels do, but in that process, that particular film, which is a kind of entire movie all told in sort of split screens, it was really it was a great adventure. And talk about planning.
I think it's Cubist, that film.
Yeah, it's a Cubist film.
It's a Cubist film. Sort of Jimi Hendrix and Cubism come together. That's how it knocked me out.
Can I use that as a quote on the re-release poster?
Yeah, that's it.
When you say it was a Cubist film, can you expand upon that?
Cubism is about trying to see three sides of an object simultaneously, or multiple sides of an object. So you're seeing, you'll see Tracy in a moment, and then you'll see Tracy in a moment either slightly before that moment or slightly after from a different angle. Maybe it's describing the same scene, but it's a different take. And you're seeing this sliver vision of the subject in the same sort of kaleidoscopic way, right? So Tracy Fragments did that for me, and so that's why it feels like Cubism.
So, but the two collaborations that we were referring to earlier are Dance Me Outside and Hardcore Logo, right? Those are the things you worked on, and so you said something interesting there about how while you were making films, you would go to comic book stores and you would start to look at graphic novels. And that might have inspired you as a filmmaker. So I'm trying to figure out, because Nick did adaptations of your films, right? I'm trying to figure out the chronology of which came first. Like, obviously the films came first, and then you adapted them into the graphic novels. But you're saying graphic novels generally have been a huge inspiration to you as a filmmaker.
Yeah, generally, and in Tracy in particular, because it's of its nature that Nick was talking about being a kind of multi-framed and sort of cubist approach. And Nick's adaptations have been done after we've shot the movie and have it in the editing room.
Or in some cases during.
Or during the process. But often, lately, I've been thinking, gosh, I've totally blown it. I've got to get Nick to get going when the script is still in the cooker, because the new release of Hardcore Logo just came out, and I was looking at it last week and admiring, just as a great piece of art and great storytelling. And what was nice about Nick's adaptation of that is that he, because it's a new medium, you're forced to do things. You have to compress things. You have to maybe change and alter the narrative slightly to make it fit into that medium. And looking at certain sequences, I was like, oh my God, this is like brilliant. If this was done before the movie, I could have totally ripped off Nick and put it in the movie, and I could have been the genius. So I'm very...
No. Change a few letters. It's more like generous. Okay.
Right. Sure.
Generous. You're being very generous.
No, but it really has made me stop and think. Well, because traditionally films are explored through storyboards.
Yes, I was going to ask about that
in the early going.
Yeah.
And storyboards are, I guess the child of a good graphic novel. Or
is that a practice you employ, storyboarding?
No, I'm terrible. I've rarely had time to actually draw the storyboards. People have this sort of impression that, oh yeah, you've kind of sit around for weeks and draw the movie and then you go and make it. But usually it's such a scramble.
Wasn't that what Hitchcock did?
He came from art department, right?
He drew the entire film and then hired a screenwriter to generate dialogue.
No, I think that's totally false. No.
Yeah.
I think he would draw, being an art department guy, he would draw the sets and draw the things. And, I have a feeling legends get built, bigger than perhaps they are. And
certainly about Hitchcock, yeah.
But yes, he was working in the studio system. There was a very ordered way of doing things back then. There was tons of money and there was tons of support. So, yeah, I think generally storyboards were essential because they built all the sets for the most part. They didn't go and find them, whereas we generally, as independent filmmakers here, we don't build sets. We go and we find our locations, and those locations tell us kind of what the shots are. Back in Hitchcock's day, they would go, I'd love a shot like this, and they would literally build that shot. They would build that room. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases, studio is very, very important to the filmmaking process.
Would you ever hire someone like, say, Nick to storyboard a script, though?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just... cooking some things now, and I'm just at that point where, and whether you end up using the storyboards or not, it doesn't even matter, because what the storyboards give you is a sense of detail and a sense of great exploration, whether it's about light or it's about wardrobe or it's about framing or it's about lenses or about sequences. Generally, independent films don't have the budget to even support that. If it's it's up to the director, they do it themselves, and generally directors can't draw. So
can you draw?
No. So
a little bit?
No,
not at all.
I can draw stick people, and I can have people look left or right, and that's about it. That's the extent. But I still do it. I still sketch out, and I find it fun and I find it enjoyable. But I do think it's a really not a necessary, but it's a really great process if you can carve out that time to do that prep work on your own with your stick people or with a talented graphic artist. I'm talking to a few people that I meet on sets and in cafes that are like, oh, I didn't know you drew. I didn't know you thing. So I'm kind of got a few of the people around town now that I'm trying to rope into sort of, and I've undecided whether I should sort of just start drawing the graphic novel or start storyboarding, because I generally don't use storyboards.
Story map. I would call it a story map.
Story map.
Because you're not necessarily trying to create mechanics for drama.
Shooting, yeah.
But more mechanics for what can contribute to the central story. How can I illustrate contribute to the central story?
So that's maybe good advice to sort of not worry about the,
It's not a final performance. It's a conversation.
Yeah, it's a kind of a story conversation about, well, how could this sequence go? How might it be? Mm-hmm. Whether it's how I would do it or somebody else would do it. And generally it would be, I'd have some ideas, but it's also just as interesting for the person you throw it out there. And maybe that's what, getting back to that idea you had about improvisation or having it all in your head. It's like you put it out there and you see what comes back.
Well, you mentioned that you've been meeting people in cafes and discovering that they can draw a little bit, and maybe you're going to pull them into a project. So I'm curious about this union between you and Nick, Bruce and Nick. I mean, this is going back a How many years now? When did you two meet? How did this happen?
About 150 years ago, I met Nick.
Yeah.
We're special. We shouldn't probably tell the secret of how we got to this planet, but anyway, we've been here for a long, long time doing cool ass shit, and but yeah, I can't. We probably met.
I know where we met. It was at the bookshelf.
Back the bookshelf, I think.
Peter Henderson.
Yeah.
In Guelph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bruce came to town to screen Highway 61 and then hung out afterwards. And Peter Henderson is the cinema manager there.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah.
Featured in Nick's book.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Former roadie, rock and roll roadie,
Yeah.
that guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I should say, so one of the things I enjoyed about reading the adaptation, the anniversary edition or whatever, is that right? Am I calling? Is that what anniversary is it again?
20th anniversary edition.
20th anniversary edition. That's right. Is that Nick took a bunch of people that we know, mutual friends, and made them kind of background characters in the book. It was quite fun for me to see all these old friends. Like,
Sure.
my friends are all
Yeah.
in the book. It's amazing.
Well, Turner's whole approach was collage, right? So I tried to say, how can I address his sense of collage in a visual way, in this comic book way? And so I started using people. And my funniest bit, for me personally, is that Jeff Bird is in it. And he is one of the few people in the book who's actually an incredibly employed musician, but in the book he's like a driver of the bus and says, "I've never heard of this band in my whole life," but he plays with the Junkies, right? He's an incredible musician.
Yeah. So Jeff Bird plays in the Cowboy Junkies, and yeah.
Back to Highway 61. So Bruce comes to Guelph to launch Highway 61, and Peter Henderson says, "This is Bruce McDonald," and I make a connection and say, I've got comics. I'm going to mail them to you. And they were these weird black and white road comics called the Cheeseheads.
Right.
And we stayed in touch. And then you were optioning Yummy Fur at the time. So that was sort of...
Yeah, it's still on the table
fuzzing
here.
around
Yes.
in the background.
What is Yummy Fur?
It's Chester Brown's...
Probably the greatest comic ever made.
Yeah.
The greatest comic ever made?
Yes.
And it's just sitting languishing on your desk?
No. I'm
Optioned?
Chester and I have been cooking it. It's a very unique and particular story that both brings people great joy and excitement, but also fills them with great fear and trepidation.
A lot of pain.
Yeah.
You gonna do anything with the Louis Riel thing?
Chester
wrote...
We were talking about it as an animated thing, but Chester had an obligation to a fellow that was going to do a stage adaptation of it. So we're like, all right, well, just let us know when that's done, and then we can get back to the animated, Louis Riel.
So but just to back up just a moment, how did you just randomly
So the
told them you
cheese-
had comic books?
No, I got some. I got
think
the
Peter
Cheeseheads, and I...
introduced- And he said, this guy's
Yeah.
an illustrator. He's a comic book artist guy from Guelph.
And I was a big fan of comics because I had been introduced really to the world of comics, more the underground comics, through a film called Comic Book Confidential.
Oh, yeah, you edited
that.
that.
Was directed by a fabulous guy named Ron Mann, which was about the history of American underground comics. And up till that point, as any suburban kid, my exposure was just, DC comics and a little bit of Marvel. Even Marvel was kind of crazy for me, right? It was like DC and that sort of thing. So this was a revelation to kind of, for me, of like, oh my God, this is incredible. So it got me very excited about storytelling and comics and independent spirit and all that sort of stuff.
Do you have a sense of what drew each of you to independent or subversive or underground culture? Because I'm always curious about that switch in us that compels us to...
Rejection.
Is it the rejection?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Rejection. See, Chester's a great example. Chester Brown began his career wanting to work for Marvel Comics. And if you dig through his archive, he'll show you his rejected samples. Can you imagine the guy who did The Happy Clown trying to draw like straight Marvel superhero comics? It's terrible. It's weird, but it's not very good at all. Like he had not discovered the voice that we all know, right? So rejection makes... Failure and rejection is the best, I think, for any artist. And I've been rejected as much as the next guy. So, but that's. I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm also trying to say that the spirit of just doing it yourself I guess there was a guy in Guelph named John Mcleod, and he was self-publishing when I was a kid and working in a comic book store. And when I discovered his work, and he was just making it with a little photocopier and selling them for 50 cents. And he had a nice line, you know. He had a great sense of storytelling. He borrowed a lot from the Hernandez brothers and Love and Rockets and so on. But it was great work. And I was a kid in a comic book store, and it looked nothing like Marvel or DC or any of this stuff. And he was making almost no money. I thought, he's doing it right here. And well, I can do that. Why can't I do that? So this spirit of independence and why can't I do that is what I guess propels a lot of people to dive in. Eventually, I did start publishing comic books in 1990. We had 5 titles. One of them was my own, and then an anthology, and a guy from New Zealand we did Jay Stevens' Sin, which was a humor book, and we did Carol Swain from Britain. And these are heavy cats over there that we brought over to North America. Of course, we didn't have any financial sense, so it didn't sustain itself. But anyway, that's a long answer to rejection, yes, and independent spirit. And I would say, you know, I've heard you say in interviews in the past that you make the film you can make, so you get your buddies together and you say, well, what can we do? And here's what I got, and here's what I got. What do you got? Mm-hmm. And then you put your energy together. It's not, there's no map.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure where the impulse comes from, but it is like there's a great quote from the General George Patton, the American general from World War II, who
I'm familiar with Patton.
And anyway, so he was asked once about warfare or battles or something, and he says, well, you never really go to war with what you want.
Right.
You go to war with what you've got, or you lose your country.
Right.
So, you know, whether what you've got is a couple of sticks and a hammer against, you know, whatever force, you don't really have any choice. So for the independent, that is often the choice of like whether should I stay or should I go? Should I make it or should I, you know, surrender to the usual way of making it, which may be never, or maybe just a bad copy of something that is, you know, already very common ground. You know, so I'm not quite sure where the impulse comes from, but in terms of the means of production, yeah, you use what you've got and you use your community.
It's interesting you both took a kind of means of production take on my question, because where I was coming from on some level was the fact that you were talking about DC and Marvel comics being the comics you were exposed to. Mm-hmm. And then when you started to discover maybe people like Nick or independent comics, it's kind of like a whole new world has emerged, isn't it? You're kind of been shown one thing, and it's readily available in sort of, you know, in the case of DC or Marvel, you could get those things at a grocery store, you know, on your way out. Whereas the things that Nick might have handed to you, there's a uniqueness to it. There's a rarity
like
secrets,
to it. Secrets from the treasure chest, you know, that we're like, wow.
And I find that when you have those moments, it sort of triggers something in you of like, oh, there's actually a whole other planet on this planet that I should be searching for.
Well, there's two narratives. There's the one that we all sort of politely participate in, and then there's the subtext. And you look at the first time you start reading Robert Crumb, you're like, holy shit, I'm so offended. But yet, it's all true. What he's saying is true, but I'm so offended. And it makes you realize that there's a place, like I guess Seth and these guys started to explore autobiographical work, I think, as a result of Crumb, I would say. But, so that's, what am I getting at? The surface story is the Marvel and the DC, the shiny penny, which is, I don't want to even go into that, but yeah, you're right. So when you discover Fugazi and you're like, holy shit, I didn't know people could do this. Why not? And then it gives you permission to break and start and make your own.
Yeah, and I can gather that that's something that we've talked about on a comic level, but did you have that on a film level for you, Bruce? Like, was there a point where, because you said rejection, and the subtext of that is, I'm not going to be successful necessarily on a grand scale, and I can accept that because I'm not motivated necessarily by that kind of success. I'm motivated by what I'm obsessed with, what I'm passionate about.
It's not even that you knocked on the door and said, "Can I have some?" and you're rejected. Sometimes you just are self-rejected. You say, "Yeah, I can't participate in that. That's not. I don't relate to the mall. I don't relate to them all. So there's got to be another way.
Yeah, exactly.
And so like Ron Mann's making Comic Book Confidential, and you're like, holy shit, this is a whole other way of being. It gives you permission to sort of explore your own voice, I guess. So not literally I got rejected by Marvel, which I did.
Did you actually get rejected by Marvel?
I did get rejected by Marvel, but then I actually got hired by Marvel later in life too. Anyway, but I want to know. You're talking about origins and so on. I want to know your first film. I think maybe your first film shot on film was the bedroom one, where you film your parents sleeping. And is that the same one where you tried to get into the White House? Mm-hmm. And what were you thinking? What was that about? Is that an example of making a film you can make with what you have? Or?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. That was about, I think, just sort of joining the dots somehow. This was a documentary about people giving me tours of their bedrooms and my girlfriend and my parents and different things. And I got it in my head at some point because I just, that I should try to film President Reagan and his lovely wife Nancy showing me their bedroom in the White House.
Or just
just because they weren't asleep. They weren't asleep. They were just kind of walking around.
Oh.
And it had all these sub themes of performance and acting and what the camera does when you turn on the camera and how people act in front of a camera. And Ronald Reagan was a former actor, and I just thought, so it was a very. I mean, at that stage, I was like early on, and I think we're all trying to make our mark.
Yeah.
So I felt a little bit like Lee Harvey Oswald going to Washington, or.
Interesting.
Hinckley or whatever his name was.
You felt like a presidential assassin.
A little bit, yes, because you go, the impulse, that shortcut to fame is just like blowing somebody's head off, right?
Right. Well, if you throw the brick, the person who throws the brick, the most famous person, is the one who's going to be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a weird, psychotic.
Is this fictional? Did you actually try to breach the White House bedroom?
Oh, yeah. No. You didn't try and breach. You tried to get permission.
Yeah, but I have a letter from the White House. I have shots in front of the White House, and I'm on TV in Washington.
You went there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
How old were you?
I was 23, I think.
And so I presume the answer was no, but what was the actual tone of the response?
It was sort of quiet bemusement. I have the letter framed somewhere. I usually have it hanging up on the wall, but it's very entertaining. It's funny.
So again, there's something.
But that impulse of back to the artistic impulse, or what fires us up, this idea of rejection or this idea of thing. I think one of the combinations I could throw into this stew would be a great ego and incredible insecurity.
Oh yeah, for sure, man.
Those
girls,
two.
You gotta get girls.
Those two.
Comic books.
Yeah.
That'll.
Yeah. Well, you never know. Some girls,
No, that's whenever Sandy, she'll point out a guy. She's gonna kill me. I say this. She'll point out a guy in town, and he's like this big beefy hockey player. She says, "Oh yeah, I remember. I used to date that guy." I'm like, "Yeah, but can he do a cartoon?
Yeah.
Can he cartoon?
Yeah.
Because he's like handsome, like big."
Yeah.
Icelandic sculpture man. I'm like, oh,
you're a good-looking man, Nick. Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
I interrupted.
Yeah.
So you were saying
ego's insecurity, making your mark. I think that's all there. It's all. I mean, these are all things that I think of when I think of independent culture as well.
Well, I'm curious about what people do now to seek out. We're talking about the underground or the independent. Independent is underground, or that sort of thing. So, when I was 20-ish, then you would hear about something, and you would pursue it, and you would find it often, right? Whereas now, is it different that if you hear about something, or if you don't see it in front of you, you don't bother to even track it down, because the fact is, it's all there in front of you. So if it's not clearly in your field of view, it does not matter. Does that have any relevance? Because it's available, right? You just go any time of day or night. You can go. Oh yeah, I can go and literally watch. I don't know.
Iggy Pop 1973.
Yeah. So
there's no urgency anymore.
Well, I'm not sort of trying to kind of say it's better then or better now. It's just different, and I'm curious, like, what the impulse is to how the underground or the avant-garde or the, that part of culture is.
In a weird way,
is either found or it's dismissed or it's just something, a whole other equation I'm not even kind of aware of.
Yeah, and in a weird way, not to sound, not because of age necessarily, but in a weird way, we might not be the guys who know that anymore. We might have been really tapped in, but the underground changes all the time. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm tapped in, but I'm probably not.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's tapped in. I mean, they are and they aren't. They're tapped into something. You're always tapped into something.
Yeah.
I think what you're getting at is you could grow up in Scarborough, and you'd be so far removed from New York or LA that's like a fantastic paradise.
It's like
so artistic happenings can evolve inside this provincialized petri dish.
Yeah.
If they're left alone long enough, interesting stuff happens, like The Clash happens, or like REM in Georgia.
Right.
But now, because everything's so instantaneous and easily accessed, it's very difficult to leave a small group of people alone on an island and let them incubate.
Yeah, are things getting weirder or are things getting more the samey, I guess that's what that does. I mean, on the other hand, I could say, well, if you're growing up in, small town nowhere, you do have access to all the groovy things going on somewhat in the big centers, and that you can kind of hand pick what you sort of want. It's slightly different from the actual experience of being there, but you can see clips of bands, you can look at art, you can do virtual tours, you can do all this stuff. And the question would be, does that finding that kind of like-minded slipstream, does that fuel your own little, yellow submarine as you kind of, rise to the surface in your small town, armed with all this sort of, international underground ammunition? Or is it even underground, or does that even have value anymore?
I think it's more like it is like a river, like a subsurface river, or a current of culture, and you can be standing in it, but not geographically. And I think it happens through connections with people. I think that's what it is. You meet somebody, like I'm talking to this man Daniel Fischlin, and he's an amazing brain. And the more time I spend with him, the more I'm like, he's a guy that I'm learning a lot from being around him. And it doesn't matter where he's located in the world. He happens to be in Guelph, which is fortunate. But
he's my thesis advisor.
Oh, there you go.
I'm very smart.
That you are. That you are. Anyway, I think it is a current, and you can tap it. You have to have your eyes open to recognize it when it's there.
Well, maybe that's it. Maybe it's that personal connection. Maybe that's the difference between on and off in a way, because no matter where you are, how much access do you have to that river? And we all now have access to the sort of the river. It's the things that actually activate you and to kind of really change your life and really switch you on is a direct personal connection with somebody. And that can change everything. Whereas watching something or reading about it in a magazine, it's a little different. It's interesting, and it's like a weather system. You go, okay, that's good, but when you actually engage with somebody sort of face to face, that probably is the difference between red and white or black and white or something.
This circles us back to this meeting at the bookshelf in Guelph. And we took a circuitous route. So you two met because you were bringing your film to Guelph, a relatively small town. What were you, a big shot Toronto guy at that time?
No, I was a nobody Toronto guy.
Nobody Toronto guy.
Yeah,
bringing your film.
Getting there, climbing up the ladder.
Right. So you meet Nick, and then you study his work, I guess.
Yeah. And
then what happens next? How do you two decide you're going to work on something together?
Well, I don't know. I can't remember who proposed it, but I had previous to on Highway 61. There was an artist in Toronto named Chris Mins, and Chris did a graphic novel adaptation of Highway 61. which I was sort of amazed at. And I think a lot of it came from this experience of working with Ron on the comic book movie, because I realized how possible it was to do this. And at that time, how popular comics were. It was a kind of becoming a kind of a re-golden age of like independent comics in the 90s. And maybe it was in my head, maybe Nick had proposed it, but I thought, let's do Dance Me Outside, which was the next.
I can tell you what it was. We did an illustrated interview with you.
That's right.
Which was a really neat and weird idea with Michel Vrana.
Right.
Who's we?
Oh, that's right.
Michel Vrana.
For what outlet? What you did an illustrated interview for? What purpose?
It's called Sputnik Magazine.
Oh,
which
yeah,
was
that's right. Yeah,
an anthology of comics. So Michel had this great idea to include an interview with someone, but make it comics, a comic strip interview of a person, which was very fascinating and fun to do. And I remember I had you walking around with a Polaroid camera like the devil in Highway 61. Because you would do that everywhere you would go. You bring a camera, not a Polaroid necessarily.
Yeah, had a little Instamatic,
But and so I guess I was in the back of your head, and then you're prepping for Dance Me Outside, and called and said, "Do you know anyone that would be good to add up?" Because I was like one of the handful of cartoonists that you knew personally, a connection. And said, "Do you know anyone would be good to do this?" And I sort of scratched my head for half an hour and said, "I would be good to do this. I should do this." And you're like, "Okay, let's go."
Did a masterful job. I mean, they're beautiful books. So it's a fun, so it's a great thing. It's nice when you have a project that shimmers out into other mediums, whether it's music or film or a book or a graphic novel.
Well, Hardcore Logo is super fascinating because it was a book by Michael Turner, right?
Yeah, it was a book, a novel. That was its first incarnation, and then it became a movie, and then it became a graphic novel. And then it became a live stage show. And then it became a tribute album recording, and it became a also a recording of songs from the movie.
Creative Commons. All on its own.
Yeah. So
I can't think of too many happenings that would cross so many platforms. At the same time, because I will say one of the things that drew me. I don't know if it necessarily drew me to the film. As I said earlier, I was already a fan of your work and would take out your films from the library and all that stuff. But I was a big Super Friends fan. Do you remember the band, the Super Friends? And they did a version of Blue Tattoo in a video. Yeah. Did you make the video?
No, it was some guys. I just helped organize the concept of having a bunch of cool bands record versions of Hardcore Logo songs.
I was obsessed with the Super Friends, and they remain one of my favorite bands. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting that they would do a version of this song, and it was sort of confusing. It got to the point, Hardcore Logo, where reality started to and fiction started to blur together. Right, people thought it was a real band, and all sorts of weird things were happening, but. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of this film, the fact that we're still talking about 20 years later? Do you think...
Can I back you up?
Yeah, sure, of course.
I want to ask you, how did you discover Turner's book in the first place?
Well, I was at a barbecue. There was a pretty girl that invited me to this barbecue at her house, and there was this guy there from Vancouver named Keith Porteous, who is he's kind of a record guy, and he knew I made movies, and he says, I got this friend of mine in Vancouver. He's written this book, or is writing this book called Hardcore Logo. He might have even had a copy of it with him because he knew I was coming and he knew I was a movie guy. And it's that kind of face-to-face connection that happens that I never would have, maybe I would have come across it at some point. But because Keith... presented it to me in this nice way and was from music, and I felt like, oh, he's of the same tribe, and I don't know, and then I read it and I was like, wow, this is great. And I've always loved music, and I'm probably a bit of a frustrated band guy. And
Do you play music?
Yeah, a little bit.
Guitar,
yeah, a little piano, a little guitar.
Drums?
No, I have a bongo. I have a bongo drum.
You got a bongo drum? Okay. Drums are fun. It's a full body workout.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're a frustrated musician.
Yeah, so, and then I thought, well, this would be good to make. This seems like easy. I'm always taking the easy route, and then it
You
turns
thought it
out
was
very
easy?
Yeah, well, a book was you could read it in like 3/4 of an hour, right?
Oh, the book was easy.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It was like, phone answering machine, very short and poems. It seemed very cinematic. It wasn't full of a lot of blah, 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 blah. It was very archetypical. It was like about a band. If we were back in the 15th century, it would be some kind of version of Commedia dell'arte, right? With these kind of very iconic figures, the bass player and the drummer and the singer and the guitar player. And in a way, in rock and roll music or popular music, there are archetypes of those people, and the book seemed to capture that very well.
Well, it's interesting to me that you were known as someone who made road films at one point, and part of what appeals to some people about those films is the characters are kind of conveying a certain restlessness. They need to be moving all the time. Then you have Nick, who has to make this static version of this traveling film. Do you both want to talk about that notion of time and space and movement and and how they relate, both in terms of, I think some of your characters tend to, the movies you make tend to be about these people who don't quite know what they're doing and are just moving forward in some way, or moving. I don't even want to say it's forward necessarily, because it's not always forward, but they're just constantly in motion to try to get somewhere in their lives. And then you had this responsibility of taking these ideas and trying to freeze them, which is an interesting thing to do to a film about motion, I suppose, on some level.
Yeah, it's completely counterintuitive to take motion picture and turn it into silent static images.
Well, on the one hand, you're doing a movie adaptation and making it into a book, so no matter what you do, you're doing that. But you are taking a film about traveling, about a journey, and doing it too. I kind of want to talk about journeys a little bit, and how they relate to your mindset about maybe how we relate to life even a little bit. It's a big question, but can you both speak to that? Again, Bruce, I don't know if you feel like you've been dogged by this label of
No, it's good. People say there are just two kinds of stories. There's the visit of the mysterious stranger, and there's the journey, right? And I've been attracted often to the journey because there's something in me that's always been attracted to those stories. Of when I was a kid, it was like Magellan and Vasco da Gama and all these guys that would go out into the oceans of the world and go and discover new lands. And I was, as a little kid, I was fascinated by that. And I was fascinated by people going to the moon and wanting to see this place. There's no real prize other than we got there, or what's out there. So it's always been in my DNA, I think. And ever since I can remember, I've always been fascinated with those faraway places, and whether they're real or they're imaginary. So the idea of the road movie was a natural, I suppose, for me. And if you think of movies like 2001 as a road movie, and Apocalypse Now is a road movie, and Huckleberry Finn is a road movie. So these journeys, so it's the journey, and maybe it's comes from simply the idea that there's mystery in the journey. What are you going to find? There's, you have a sense that you'll meet, people along the way, that you'll be somehow transformed by this journey, that maybe by putting yourself out there, on a personal level or on a kind of a project level, where you're kind of putting yourself out there on this journey to do this project, you will be transformed, and perhaps other things will be transformed.
Now, is it silly to say that as a Canadian, you're engaging in your landscape in a way that is uniquely Canadian?
Well, it probably is not a stretch to say that, because we live in a land where to get from here to there, it takes forever, right? We do a lot of traveling. I don't know. I guess everybody does a lot of traveling, but especially in a hardcore logo sense, to get from, Vancouver to Calgary is like a day.
It
right?
means something.
Not 2 hours where you get from Munich to Paris or something, right? It's like, oh, that's 4 hours or something, or with 4 places in between to play.
Yeah.
But yeah, Canada has always had that sense of mystery about it. We sort of line up along the border, and we've got a lot of people in front of us, but to our backs is this great, vast, dark, mysterious, unknowable forest of weirdness, you know. And so we're kind of on the edge of between civilization and ancient, weird, God knows what's in there stuff, you know. And we're those kind of people that I think can operate in both those worlds fairly well. We can be civilized people, but there's a kind of wildness, and all the people here are from somewhere else. They've come here as travelers or as seekers or something like that from other lands. So it's an interesting place.
We live in a country that is has an infrastructure for arts on some level, and a funding infrastructure that really emphasizes, I guess, spreading the word about Canada, reflecting Canada in work. Is it important for, I mean, beyond grants, beyond...
Well, that's Bruce's new film, Weirdos, is fueled, largely the soundtrack is fueled by that 1967 summer of Canadian content, right?
Yeah, 76.
Sorry,
actually.
76, I should say.
Yeah.
There wasn't that a mandate to...
Well, in the 70s...
What's going on where American culture was...
Well, in the
given the
70s...
You're talking about CanCon now.
CanCon.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the radio, that was, you know, normal to hear no Canadian music because it was, you know, it was just popular music. So lots of great popular music from Britain and America. And then at some point, I guess, through pressure from musicians' unions or somebody that said, hey, we're musicians, and how come we can't get our fucking song on the radio? And after some politicking and things, somebody managed to convince the government to say, you know what, in order to kind of get a sense that we too have musicians. Canada also has a kind of something to contribute to this radio and this media culture. They'll be forced to play, I think, 40% Canadian content. Maybe not
30,
even that, 30%.
Yeah, 30.
Like they have to play it. Whereas before that, it might have been, 2%. So suddenly this is the early 70s. And so suddenly there was an echo that you're still feeling today, this renaissance where suddenly people were hearing, their hometown band, the Stampeders, or they were hearing this and they were like, pretty good songs. And they were just part of the general pop culture thing. I mean, I'm sure the Stampeders were riffing on, American bands and British bands and old blues bands and that sort of thing. So, but with a particular, Albertan flavor or a particular something or other. And so suddenly by, the late 70s, there was something to talk about.
And I mean, what I was getting at is that some of that is mandated, right, by these arts infrastructures and a demand on some level for Canadian content among Canadians. But is that important to you two, to reflect the country in your work? For me, all I'll say is I have consciously avoided that. I kind of want to. I feel like it's important. I represent this country and I have a perspective on this country, but I like to talk to people from all over the place. I would hate to be forced to only speak to Canadian artists or only reflect Canadian issues. But at the same time, I've noticed that. So in some level, a show like this one is more popular around the world than it might be even in Canada, and that's just because of who I've chosen to have on. It's fascinating to me that Canadians are more. And when I worked at CBC, that was often the case too. Like I'd have Thurston Moore on, and that wouldn't do as well, in terms of web traffic or whatever, as some small band from Saskatoon.
Is what you're asking? Has CanCon regulation stifled? Is that what you're saying?
That's a bigger picture thing. I don't necessarily want to go down that road on a legislative level or anything like that. I just mean for you too personally. Bruce has made many films that reflect. You mentioned the Canadian landscape. Hardcore Logo is literally a film about people traveling across. Well, they don't quite make it, but they travel across Canada, and that's a gesture. That's like, look at this country, look at the expanse. These guys, with all their tension and all their problems, are going to not only deal with themselves, they're going to deal with this landscape, and that's important. Like it showed Canada to a lot more people than maybe would have seen it before. I'm just curious if that's an impulse for either of you. to reflect Canada?
I think you reflect where you are. I mean, if you're Jack Kerouac, you're not necessarily thinking, I'm going to show off America. I'm going to try to do an American thing. That's not the first agenda. He's just like, I'm writing about my experience. I'm writing about where I'm going. I'm going to Denver. I'm going to meet Neil Cassidy. I'm going to have adventures, and it becomes one of the great American classics. But the impulse didn't start with him going, I would like to do something for America, whereas, living here, I do feel that, especially as you do more and more, I do feel that I feel like as a guy with the powers of being an artist and the privilege of what that is, that I feel like, well, okay, I have lots of choices of what to do. I could do sci-fi things. I could do I could do this. And part of me thinks like, well, I think part of my maybe obligation, if that's a word, is to reflect, where you are. Like I like often shooting here now and again, shooting stuff in Toronto and go, this is the city I live in. And if I lived in Cincinnati or New Orleans, it would probably be that city. But it's not that I'm drawn to Toronto because Toronto's so cooler than San Francisco or Madrid. It's just, no, I live here, and I can see how the light changes on that building. There's a lot of information that I have that I would like to sort of show how beautiful that is. And the fact that I live here is sort of an accident, and the fact that there are some cultural agencies that have supported me, that's all good too, because I would have done it somehow, maybe not with the same kind of movies or something, but I couldn't have done it without some telefilm or Ontario Arts Council or Canada Council that this country supports their artists. So they're not really telling you what to do, other than like, hey, you're Canadian, and we love it when you go out into the world and show your films in Istanbul and Shanghai and Madrid and London.
But how do you, it seems difficult to examine yourself and say, identify what parts of you are Canadian, uniquely Canadian. I think it's hard to know yourself in that way without living a breadth, without seeing the world. And everyone knows that to know your own country, you need to leave it and see the contrasts of color that are there. So I know that I'm completely informed by my Canadianness, but I couldn't tell you how. I don't know how. I've just finished working on this great long 200-page children's book, fully illustrated, about hockey. And I know that when people see when it hits the world, I'm making this impression on children about what hockey is. And I'm trying to see it through their eyes. And I know, even though I can't tell you how, I know that work is Canadian. It's totally,
it's not. You're not making it about cricket, or water polo.
Not just that. It's not just that it's because it's hockey. It's because it's my experience of hockey as a child in the 60s and 70s, and what that means. Hockey Night in Canada, and that sort of weird blue glow 1970s. Because I don't know anything about hockey. I don't know anything about the rules of hockey, but I know visually how it strikes me. So I'm projecting funneling all this crap into this work for kids who are like 4 to 8 years old. And I know that it will be perceived as Canadian. And it is, I guess.
There's a connotation with that sport and our country.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, I appreciate this conversation, and I want to bring it back to sort of summarize it on some level by at least bringing us back to Hardcore Logo, because it is the 20th anniversary of this thing.
Yeah.
I think we've weaved in and out of what this film is saying throughout this conversation, but can either of you, or both of you rather, speak to why you think we're still talking about this thing 20 years since Nick's book, since the film came out in 95, I believe? Do you think this story is still relevant? It's about a band. We live in a really weird musical landscape now. It's about tension. It's about identity. It's about rejection. It's about aspiring for success on some level. It's about all sorts of. It's about lying It's about lots of different things. Is there...
I have an answer for that. May I? I think the base culture of a thing can be found in its smallest parts. Like what do you call that when you make a soup or
like the sauce or the base?
When you make a dough and the culture in the fridge, you leave it in the
and
the dough stays there. You take the culture and you put it in. You can make more culture anyway.
Right.
So the source material for that work, all the details are so left out. It's so loose and open for yourself to walk in and say, "Oh, I can do something with this," and you build this thing, this amazing film. And then the next guy looks at it and goes, "Oh yeah, I can do something with this." So in other words, there's no ceiling on it. Most crappy narrative puts a ceiling on the viewer and says, "Here's how I want you to feel. Here's the Disney score. It's going to tell you what you're supposed to take out of this moment." And it sort of boxes you in and tells you how to feel. So that ceiling stops you from internalizing and having your own experience of the narrative, right? But the source material of Hardcore Logo is so without a ceiling that, I mean, you can take it and say, okay, well, it was an acoustic reunion, but I'm going to throw that out. Let's make it a little angrier. Let's get Hugh Dillon. Let's electrify it. And let's introduce the character of the filmmaker who's participating in the fate.
Yeah, I think that you're right on this sort of, part of its appeal is the sort of no ceiling on it, but it's because of those archetypes. And I think the movie in particular, and the book and the graphic novel, the thing for me that struck me and still strikes me is that this is a story about friendship. This is a story about two people having to part ways, and who are the deepest of friends in a very complicated way. It's about, so you could say it's about a marriage that breaks up. It's about a friendship that breaks up. It's about, it's that the pain of having to reckon with that sort of like, that union is suddenly, for all kinds of reasons, has to go its own way. And I think that touches a lot of people, where everybody has had that experience. Everybody's afraid of that experience. Everybody craves that friendship, that kind of like, that's that special person in my life.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the movie, having more familiarity with that, that's what I get from that. And that's what I get from the idea of being in a band that is this kind of band of brothers or band of sisters or whatever the band is, but it's that kind of feeling, getting back to that touchstone of like, oh yeah, the creativity and things happening comes as a result of people meeting in person and being together. And that's where things happen. And so it's, to me, it's about...
Some of those things are never going to go out of fashion or things we're not going to talk about. But one of the things I do want to talk about structurally is the mediated reality of the film, of the book. You put this out in 95. These days we talk about mockumentaries a lot more than we used to, I feel like. I mean, I don't even know where I couldn't, I can talk about Spinal Tap. I can talk about the Larry Sanders Show. I can talk about all sorts of things that really tried to take reality. Even Seinfeld on some level was based on real people, but they fictionalized it. And the more you learned about the show, I'm talking about 90s thing. There was a point in the 90s where I feel like we were really grappling with what was real and what was fake, and that turned into reality television very shortly thereafter. And on some level, this film, you have a guy keeping a diary, or the story rather. You have a bandmate, one of the band members is keeping a diary of what's going on the road, and that's his perception of reality. You have the structure of the film where people are talking to the camera and trying to explain what they think is going on, but it's all fake. It's real, but it's fake. Yeah. And I think that on some level, you were potentially ahead of both of you in terms of this structure. We're a little ahead of your time, maybe? Like, do you feel that? Because this is very common now. Lots of sitcoms adopt this, like, I'm just going to talk, the character suddenly is talking to us. And it seems like, oh, this is real, but it's not. I'm just curious.
I guess my touchstone in that world, which I still find endlessly fascinating, because it's about making fake things real, which is just the job of the storyteller.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? So I remember being in film school and seeing this film called David Holtzman's Diary, which was made probably in the late 60s in New York by a guy named Jim McBride. And it was about a guy, this was at the height of the cinema verite craze, where people were taking sort of portable 16 millimeter motion picture cameras and making documentaries about, political elections and about, institutions. And everybody was like, wow, this is kind of amazing, right? They're documentaries. It's really happening. These aren't actors. Because that had never really been seen much in film before. Before that, film was like actors in Hollywood and all this stuff. So I remember watching this film, which is a half-hour film. It's about a guy saying, "Hey, I'm trying to get my life together, and I think if I put it on film, I'll get to understand where I'm at, man." And so he's shooting his girlfriend and shooting where he lives, and he one day gets a new lens for his camera, and he's filming people in Central Park. And anyway, this goes on, and you're like, wow, this is great. This is total verite, total kind of self analysis. And then the last scene of the movie, it fades to black, and then the scene comes up, and it's his face in these photo booth pictures. And it's just like, well, I would love to be able to film myself, but my loft got broken into, and all my gear, my Aeroflex and my Niagara got ripped off by some junkies. And my last message to you, that's all I have. I've got a couple of quarters in the kind of recording machine and a thing, and I just want to thank you for, going on this journey with me. And then I'm going, wow, it's so amazing. What a incredible way that this perfect ending. And then the credits come up, and it's written by, performed by, and I'm realizing, oh my God, this is a complete fabrication. It blew my mind. And I've never forgotten that, and then, along the way, other films and the ones you've mentioned that I also was drawn to, because there's that magician's sleight of hand where you're, as the audience, you're totally there. You're totally believing this.
Yeah, it's really messing with our relationship with authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that fascinating. I think that's one of the reasons that I say it's ahead of its time, but I think it's resonant. Like, that's something we still are just grappling with. What is real? What is fake? What is true? What is a lie? And I find that that's really this project, if you will, this film, this book, it's really steeped in that confusion.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I don't know, what we can do to illuminate the facts and the truth, but maybe just by pointing out the kind of house of mirrors that you can get into quite easily, it gives you a healthy respect for, all that's going on in the bigger picture of the media, of the fake news and all this sort of, the media landscape, where, just watch it with a little bit of extra, like, how do they construct that? What are they telling you? How, it's like trust, what's the, question authority, and media right now is the authority, right? Or it is the big authority. So maybe films like this or projects like this kind of help to at least examine the kind of the little house of mirrors, so in a fun way. And then you're like, well, if that's the case, maybe we should just be a bit more aware when we take things as gospel that we see,
totally,
in the newspaper or on TV.
Yeah. Well, what's next for Hardcore Logo? What's next for each of you? Do you want to talk about your future plans and what's going on with this celebration for this particular project?
Well, we've got a digital screening of Hardcore Logo, May the 17th at the Bookshelf Cinema, followed by at 6:45, and then a 9:15 screening of Weirdos, Bruce's new film. In between, there'll be chit chat and a special surprise that I've prepared for the evening, which I will not tell you about.
Wow! Oh, special surprise! I like that.
News for Bruce.
Yeah.
Tiny little surprise.
Yeah.
And then signing books, selling books, lots of books, hopefully. And so that's happening. And then TCAF is happening on the 13th and 14th at the Toronto Reference Library. And House of Anansi, who's the publisher, has a table there, and I'll be there signing books. And
what's TCAF?
Toronto Comic Art Festival. It's a big deal in Toronto, and they're expecting about 15 to 20,000 people coming through to.
Wow, that's great!
To nerd it out.
Yeah,
but it's like a comic.
So will you see Chester Brown there? You think
Chester's work will be there.
Yeah,
his new Mary book will be there. He'll be there.
Right. Yes.
there's several.
Do you know Seth? Have you ever worked with Seth?
I've
or
never
know
worked
of
with him. He lives in Guelph now,
Yeah,
though,
yeah.
and we see each other at the time
Yeah.
at the barbershop. Or
You know,
whatever.
he has the greatest card, the business card, and I met him once for the first time, and he gave me his card, and on it says, "Pleased to make your acquaintance." On the back is his name. But I just thought that was
very
really
nice.
classy.
Yeah, he is classy.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so that's that.
And then Toronto, the Royal Cinema is screening
Mhm.
the 35 millimeter print from your own personal collection
Mm-hmm.
on the 24th
Mhm.
at 8 o'clock. Lynn Crosby is coming to speak.
Oh, great.
Yeah, the publisher set
The
that
Cros.
up, and the publisher's selling books there. I'll be heading out of town on the 19th, so unfortunately
I'll be impersonating Nick Craine at the
nice.
screening. Yes,
Great.
I'll be signing the
Excellent.
books. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, that's great. So that's Hardcore Logo stuff. Where can people find out more about the book?
House of Anansi.
.com?
Yeah, .ca, I believe.
And Nick,
Canadian.
what's your new book going to be? You talked about this hockey book coming out.
Comes
Yeah.
out in October,
Okay.
the 17th, and I'm going to do some signings at hockey games.
Nice.
This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
And
Like NHL games?
maybe, probably, I don't know, OHL for sure. But I'm so pleased to be speaking directly to kids. It's drawing for kids. It's like they don't have any of the crap, right? It's straight to the back of the head. The lizard brain responds to the images immediately.
I should turn you on to this series we made in Montreal called The Tournament, which is all about sort of hockey parents and kids.
Yeah.
It's not much about the kids. It's really about the hockey parents. And it's very entertaining.
Okay.
So I'll try to get you a link to that.
All right.
You'll find
Thanks.
it very funny.
What's your hockey book called, Nick?
It's called 5-Minute Hockey Stories, available from HarperCollins Canada.
Very nice. All right, that's great.
And I'm off to Europe. I'm doing some research for a long-standing project I've been chewing on for a decade or so about William Shakespeare. So I'm going to the source.
You're going to Europe to research William Shakespeare.
Correct. Going to London, going to Stratford, going back to London.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, he was big. He was important. Shakespeare. Yeah, people talk about him. Bruce, what about you? Do you have plans that you can share at this point?
Oh, gosh. Well, we just shot this one-man show by Torquil Campbell, who's a fantastic actor and singer of Stars, called True Crime. So that was sort of fun, more of a document of a great, great, great show. We're editing a movie now called A Love Supreme, which is a kind of a jazz romance, all done in. It's more of an art piece than a movie. It's more of an art installation piece.
Okay.
It's kind of groovy. And then we're working up to a little crime movie, a little surrealistic crime movie in the fall called Dreamland, written by Tony Burgess, starring Steve McCaddy, and yeah. So
Got a lot on the go.
Cooking up stuff. You gotta do stuff.
All right. No, this is good. I appreciate this time. Normally at this point in the program, I will ask my guests, who are often musicians, to pick a song
Oh my gosh!
that we can go out on. And we're talking about Hardcore Logo. It's a musical thing. Is there something we can go out on? And I know that the book comes with a 7-inch, which Nick gave me, which was very kind of you. Is there something we can play? I don't know if we can play something from the 7-inch necessarily, but is there something? What do you want to do?
I don't know if it's possible to play something from the 7-inch. That's up to you, I guess.
Is it digitally available?
Maybe in the ebook, I think.
Can you get me a copy?
I'll try and get it. Yeah. Try Never Done.
Never Done. What is this?
It's a fictitious, again,
All right.
song by Bucky Haight.
Bucky, one of the characters, one of the main muses of Hardcore Logo.
Yeah.
Yeah, circa 1977.
And the song is called
Never Done.
Never Done. And why is it called Never Done?
Well, it's because that's the chorus, but it's actually called that because this project is never done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To go like this.
There'll be more.
It's like
There'll be logo. More logo to come.
It's like an asteroid hole.
So Bucky Haight was a fictional character. This is one of his songs. Who's performing it?
Myself.
In what year?
And Tristan O'Malley and Pat Mooney from the Battered Wives. 20 years ago, I recorded this, 1996 or 5.
It's 2017, Nick. I'm just looking at my watch. So
somebody's working on a TV series of like young Hardcore Logo touring America. Did you know that?
No.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
Who's doing that?
A company in London, actually, called Unigram.
In Ontario.
No, in London, England.
London, England.
Yes.
Get out.
So this hardcore logo thing is just like
I know, it's a
mutation.
juggernaut. I wish I was getting big checks from everything, but anyway, it's all great. Can I pick a song too?
Well, I mean...
no, we got one.
We
can only
normally
pick
do
one.
one. Do you want to pick
one?
one?
No, just the one. That's perfect.
Okay.
Young Bucky.
Sorry, Bruce. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay, next time. Are we going to do this again?
We can.
Something?
Did you have fun?
It was great.
Okay, yeah, we should do it again. Yeah, we can totally do it again.
Yeah.
All right. Nick, Bruce, this was really a pleasure. Thank you for being on this program and talking to me, and I hope we can talk again, like Bruce says.
That's
Thanks,
awesome.
Vish.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, well done.
There were so many things I had to tell you. If you put it on a scale, ain't weigh it hard. I am breaking from the weight of all my sorrows. I'm so sorry for the things I've never done. I was gonna buy you diamonds, gold and rhinestones. We were gonna take a trip into the sun. All the flowers that I gave us from the garden. I'm so sorry for the things I've never done. I'm a horse that put out a one-track party. I'm an empty shotgun cartridge from a gun. I'm a lonely pony high and loves a cowboy who is sorry for the things he's never done.
That was Never Done by Bucky Haight, which, as you heard, isn't exactly real. Thanks to Nick Craine and Bruce McDonald for being on the show to talk about Hardcore Logo and lots of other stuff, too. I enjoyed that one a lot, and I hope I get to talk to Bruce and Nick sometime soon when we're all feeling better, because clearly one of us has a sore throat. This is the 319th episode of Creative Control with Vish Khanna, a podcast which is available on all your favorite podcast platforms: iTunes, Audio Boom, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Overcast, everywhere. YouTube, it's in lots of places. You can learn more about the show at vishkhanna.com. Also visit patreon.com/Creative Control to make a flexible monthly donation to the podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Vish Creative. You can like us on Facebook, which is just the show name. You can find us there and like us and tell your friends to like us. And you can listen to a version of this show every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time around the world at CFRU.ca, or if you're in the area at CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph. That's 93.3 FM in Guelph on your radio dial. This episode would not be possible without our sponsors, the finest pizzeria in Guelph, Pizza Trocadero. Call them for pickup or delivery at 519-829-2444, or check them out at trocaderoguelph.ca. Also, The Bookshelf, an independently owned bookstore, bar, music venue, movie theater, and restaurant located at 41 Quebec Street in Guelph. Learn more about them at bookshelf.ca. And for the finest coffee anywhere, try Planet Bean, freshly roasted, fair trade, certified organic coffee. They have 3 locations in Guelph, but they also distribute their coffee beans throughout Ontario and possibly even beyond. If you want to get their coffee and serve it up at your store, wherever you're listening, visit planetbeancoffee.com for more info. All right, like I say, I'm a little under the weather, so I'm going to cut this short and say thank you for listening. Please keep listening, review, rate, subscribe, download episodes of the show, do everything you can, and I'll do what I can, and we'll just all keep doing stuff, okay? Thank you very much. Goodbye for now.